Good morning, and a very warm welcome to the real estate webinar. My name is Richard Rees and I'm Managing Director of Savills UK. It's my pleasure to host this event. We're very disappointed. We did hope that we would have a real life event in our office here in Margaret Street, but due to the train strikes and all sorts of other things, we thought it was probably best to do this via webinar. So I'm going to hand over to Lara in a minute, Lara Newman, head of Located. But just to probably introduce the context of the session, this is to compare the different approaches to diversity and inclusion between the public and the private sector. I think it's fair to say that everyone in the industry has been working very hard on D&I over the course of the past couple of years. I think we made some really good progress, but there's lots more to do. And I think one of the really interesting things today is to be able to share best practice and be able to communicate with everyone exactly some of the really good things we're doing and how to resolve some of the challenges that we're all facing. You've got a very interesting panel. I'm not going to introduce that. I'm just going to hand you over to Lara now, who's going to take you through this morning's session and guide you through the webinar. So over to you, Lara.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you also to Sue Brown, who you will hear a few words from at the end. This is a real estate balance event kindly hosted by Savills. So Sue will wrap up at the end. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping. There will be an audience Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so. So you will see at the bottom of your Zoom screen that there's a Q&A button that has been enabled. So you can write your questions into the Q&A function, and then I will pick those up after we finish the questions, the panel discussion. So just a little bit more about me. So I'm Lara Newman, I'm the Chief Executive of Located. I'll be chairing today. So Located is an arm's length body. We're a property company wholly owned by the Department for Education, so a private company but in the public sector. From my point of view, I've always worked in the private sector, but quite often with public sector clients. So I come with that interesting mix, but I do not have all the answers to the question that we're posing today. But hopefully our panel members will be able to give us some really interesting insights. So I will introduce our panel members now, and if you will all come on screen, that would be great. So we have Janet Young, Director General and Secretary at the Institution of Civil Engineers, and a lot of you will remember that Janet was very recently Government Head of Property Profession. We have Chanelle Gray, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Savills, Harry Swales, Chief Investment Officer at Homes England, and last but not least, Emma Cariaga, Joint Head of Canada Water and Head of Residential at British Land. So welcome to our panel members. Can everybody hear me okay? Janet, I'm hoping we won't have a government property awards style carnage event like we did a couple of years ago, which many people enjoyed, but Janet and I certainly did not. I know enough about Zoom, I hope to get us through this, and I hope everybody else too. So as I say, we'll stop for an audience Q&A about 10 minutes before 10 o'clock with a hard stop at 10. Sue will wrap up. But first off, a question to all of you, but I'll start with who I'm going to go in order of who's on my screen on the first question, if you don't mind. So property is foundational for the economy and has such a big role to play in furthering a fairer and more inclusive society. What are your organisation's priorities in D&I right now? And Chanelle, I'm kicking off with you because you're top left of me on the screen.
No problem. Hi, everyone. So at Savills, we have 6 amazing working groups, and these groups are very strategically focused. So they are focused around 6 pillars. So we have age, disability, gender, ethnicity, LGBT, and social mobility. And each of those groups are focused around the particular issues, barriers, and progression of people that fall within those categories. And then I have created a strategy that sits above the 6 groups, which looks at our attraction processes, how we develop people and how we lead people. And that for us is key, because it's the inclusion part, and it's making sure that we're looking at the intersectionality between all of the groups and the different issues that people might face if they do have those intersectionality crossovers, and also just making sure that everybody has the same type of experience within the workplace and that there is a consistency across how we do things. So for us, it's all about being able to bring your whole true self to work, being able to perform at your best because you are treated the way that you should be, and that every opportunity is available to you, and that progression opportunities are fair and open as well.
Chanelle, thank you. We are going to talk a bit about networks at Savills later and the role that those networks play, so we'll come back to you on that. Janet, how do you feel about answering that question next?
Great, thanks very much. Morning, everyone. So as Lara said, I'm going to probably focus my answer mainly on the job I've just left, because I was invited to this panel under that role. So for the government property profession, diversity and inclusion is absolutely central and key. Why is that? Because in the public sector, we provide property and look after property to deliver public services. So making sure that the people that are working on those projects, on those transactions, are actually representative of the communities we serve is incredibly important. And that then leads us, because those of us that worked in property for a while will know that the industry itself is not wholly representative of the communities we serve. We've got a lot of activities in government. I'm sure in the last couple of weeks since I've left, not too much has changed yet to build the kind of initiatives and networks that Chanelle touched on that are happening in Savills. And there's, I'll just pull out one particular example that is very close to Lara's heart, actually, because Lara's the diversity champion for government property. And that's trying to include the more sort of junior parts of the property profession in strategic decision making. So we have a board of all the very senior property leaders from around government, and we've set up a shadow board which Lara sponsors to pull in representatives from all across different groups who are underrepresented, give them a chance to participate and take part in decision making. Might be more to say on that later, so I'll sort of leave it there. Lara, back to you.
Thank you, Janet. Emma, what are British Land's priorities in D&I right now?
Morning, thanks Lara. Hello everyone. So at British Land, much like Janet, I suppose, we're very keen to ensure that we have a good representation of the communities that we operate in at our assets within our business. And to do that, we have focused on developing a series of what we call employee staff networks. We have 10 now that cover a pretty full spectrum, we think, of diversity and inclusion. We've spent a lot of time putting those together and making sure that they are championed and led by individuals right throughout the organisation, sponsored at a very senior leadership level to give it that profile and emphasis. And I suppose where we're now at is at a point where we're trying to use those networks, both as a talent retention and recruitment tool for our business, but also to spread their knowledge amongst the assets that we own and manage. So to give you a really good example of that in practice, our Enable network, which is focused on disability, has done some really interesting work trying to impart their knowledge and understanding of how we can make our places more accessible and more inclusive for people who visit there, who work there, who come to shop there, or who might live there. So it's using the staff networks to impart their thinking and their insight into the way we run our business, which is where we're starting to see some real progress made. Thank you.
Emma, sorry, do you mind if I think that's absolutely fascinating. Can I probe a little further on that particular point, the last point you made? How does that actually, how do you do that? How do you make sure, how do you get those insights? And is it kind of, do you get those directly from the networks and then take them to the projects, or are the networks directly involved in the projects?
It's the latter.
Okay.
So the networks have had, so a couple of examples. We own a lot of retail parks, shopping centres, but sort of a bit more of an outdoor model, using our Enable network to help impart insights and be involved in the process about ensuring that those places are dementia friendly. In terms of how customers experience and use those places, right through to our London campuses, where that same network has been involved in reviewing designs of entrance lobbies, how people move and approach a reception desk as a disabled person, how that feels, and what needs to change in terms of that welcome experience for that customer to make that a more fruitful, joyful one for them as customer, and ultimately for us in terms of value as landlord.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. And Harry, last but not least, what are Homes England's priorities in D&I right now?
Hi there, Laura, and good to be here. Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know us, Homes England are the government's housing agency. We invest in many different ways in supporting partners across the public and private sector to deliver homes and make housing more affordable. So I'm sure we'll come back and talk a bit about the sort of inclusivity and diverse aspects of the work that we do. As an organisation, I think one of the things that's been really important to us is that, as others have said, that we really represent the communities that we work with. One of the things that we've done over the course of the last year is work with EY on the National Equality Standards. So really doing a very comprehensive review of the organisation, of where our strengths are and where there are areas that we can develop. So actually putting a real plan in place to allow us to make sure that diversity and inclusion are really at the core of what we do. And that's both about how we organise ourselves, but also the culture and the way in which we engage. So that's been a really important part of putting a framework around how we approach this as an organisation. I think one of probably the most distinctive differences between the public and private sector is the fact that we have the public sector equality duty, which actually requires all public organisations to work and demonstrate how they eliminate discrimination, harassment, victimisation, and how we advance equality of opportunity between those people who have protected characteristics of age, disability, gender, race, religion, with those that don't. So I think that's a really important part of a legal framework, as well as our moral and personal commitment to being a diverse organisation and supporting our communities to be diverse as well. So I think one of our big priorities is making sure that that's really apparent and transparent in all of the decisions that we take. So it's actually a really core part of our governance. When we make an investment decision, we will have considered what that might mean in terms of furthering those objectives under the public sector equality duty. So governance and decision making, really important part of how we demonstrate. I think, as others have said, our staff networks are incredibly powerful and important. We have 8 networks that cover a range of groups, from faith to gender to ethnicity and carers, which I think is a really important part of the work-life balance. As somebody with dyslexia, I've worked with our neurodiversity network, and actually through that I've gained a lot as a leader in understanding a bit more about myself. So I think that's been a really important part of what we've been doing as an organisation. And then I think finally the role that we have as in industry leadership, and that's why I think today's a really important conversation to be having. But how do we work with all of those organisations that are part of delivering a really healthy and diverse housing market? So we work with our supply chain as well as our partners to start to think about how we share best practice. And there was a session just last week bringing together all of the consultants on one of our frameworks to really talk about what's happening. So I think knowledge sharing is going to be a really important part of how we collaborate across the public and private sector. I suppose the final thing I'd say is much of what we're trying to achieve isn't different whichever part of the economy, whichever organisation you work in. So I think there's some really unifying objectives that I know that we'll all have about how we make a more inclusive economies, more inclusive communities across the country.
Thanks, Harry. And just to stay with you for a moment and explore something that you said there in a bit more detail. What do you think housing's role is in creating opportunity for everybody?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. And I think I would start by saying that I think housing and being able to provide a safe and secure home for everyone is vitally important to society. I think the implications of not having a safe and secure home can be pretty dramatic and can have a really detrimental impact on individuals' lives and on communities. So I think being able to provide a safe and secure home that everyone can afford is a really important part of government's role and ours as an organisation. We invest billions of pounds every year in delivering affordable and social housing, and I think that's probably one part of our activity that does have a huge implications for kind of people's life opportunities. We talk about inclusion and diversity, and one of the things that I think is important there is life chances and social mobility. So socioeconomic background isn't actually a protected characteristic, but it's incredibly important, and therefore I think our work with housing associations can have a huge positive impact here. I think one of the things that I've been so impressed by when I've worked with the sector is that actually we think about housing associations providing homes. They do an awful lot more than that. They are a real community stakeholder, and there are organisations that do fantastic work with quite specialist and vulnerable groups of people, whether that's around the sort of acute end of rough sleeping and homelessness and people in temporary accommodation, and we do have over 100,000 children and families in temporary accommodation. That can have really big impacts on your ability to learn, your education. So we work really hard with the housing associations to provide the homes that people need, and it's the services that go with them. We recently had Ben Lai, who is a chief executive of a housing association in South London, Akia Housing, who work with young Black mothers in Brixton and other parts of South London in providing housing, but not just safe and secure housing. They provide subsidised childcare because they know that that's a really key part of enabling those young women to be able to access work, access education and training and skills. So we think about it beyond housing and with the services that are supporting people. It can be about skills, it can be about being able to access a job, it can be about financial planning, but that all I think supports people with life chances and allows them to be a more included part of society. So hugely important work happening there. I think taking a step back strategically, looking at how we actually plan and master plan for future places is critically important. So how do we engage with communities in that design process is vitally important. So again, are we hearing a diverse range of voices as we design, as we think about the facilities, the amenities, the open spaces that are needed, the education offer, the health offer, I think is all an incredibly important part of making sure that we're able to establish healthy, long-term, successful.
Thank you, Harry, that's great. Thank you. I mean, it's one of the key priorities that we're located, and also Janet knows that I feel very strongly about this, is getting more diversity in at the grassroots level into the hopper, and the social mobility I think is a really important point, not socioeconomic, but not being a protected characteristic. So Janet, do you think, hell of a question this, and somewhat leading, do you think the property sector does enough to attract a diverse enough cohort at grassroots level?
Well, I think the answer to that is probably no, because there's always more that we can do. And I think it is important, actually, and I'm seeing this in the new job as well, in the sort of infrastructure side. I think it's important to look at not just the totality of who we've got working in property, but actually segment it a bit. So if we look at the people that we've attracted into property, and I apply this to government property as well, at the sort of, what you might call the sort of intake, your phrase, Lara, the hopper, we're doing much better. in terms of attracting women and attracting people from minority ethnic backgrounds. We're doing less well on other characteristics, principally because we don't have data. So, you know, there will always be a bit of a chicken and egg here about persuading people to share that data. But if you look at the other end of the spectrum and how we're doing in the industry and in government property of people that are in more senior positions, they are not so representative. So I think we've absolutely got to keep up the momentum on all those early talent programs. I do think that, you know, attracting people in to property should be really easy. I mean, you know, it's amazing to work in property. You know, it's very tangible. You can really see the connection between what you're doing and making people's lives better. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can and should do and keep doing. But I think one of the big challenges for everybody, probably, I'd be surprised if anybody says they've cracked it, is getting that progression through the ranks. And there's probably a lot more that we need to do on that around sponsoring people, mentoring, and sort of helping people break through some of those glass ceilings. So, I mean, I could sort of talk for ages on this, but I'll probably leave it there, Lara, because I think you probably want to get some other people's points of view.
Thank you.
I don't think we've cracked it just yet.
No, thank you, Joelle, Janet, I would agree. Chanelle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are doing a lot on grassroots level. And I think part of the reason why there's been such a focus, especially at Savills, is because we think it's a bit of a hidden sector. So in particular backgrounds and particular sort of communities, it's just not really something that people think about when they think about what they want to be when they grow up. And we also know that sometimes parents can be a bit of a blocker. So if you was to turn around at school age and say, I'm going to go into property, you might find a bit of a blocker from your parent that would say, no, you're going to go and be a doctor, you're going to go and be a lawyer, you're not going into property. And I think as well, and I fell into this because I'm from the civil service before I joined the private sector. I didn't know what property entailed, so I thought it was estate agents and building houses. Like I wasn't sure.
That's what kids think.
Exactly.
We really need to debunk that myth. It's a real problem, isn't it?
Absolutely.
There's so many jobs.
And I think that's part of what at Savills, we have our Savills with Schools program, and it's an amazing program because it takes volunteers from the business, and we've got so many people that are really interested in supporting this, putting them into schools across the country, not just deprived schools, because we think this is something that needs to be open to everybody across all protected characteristics, but certainly with a focus on areas with larger levels of with sort of free school meals and things like that. But we want to debunk that myth, and we want to showcase all of the different things that you can come into property to do. But I definitely agree with Janet that there needs to be more done at experience higher level, and taking more transferable skills into consideration when you're bringing people from maybe other industries or sectors into more senior roles as well, because you bring in lots of people at grassroots, they need people to look up to, they need positive role models at senior levels that they can look at and be like, well, they made it, so I can make it. And this is a place that welcomes me and that I can progress and that I can flourish. So that is absolutely something that we're factoring in at Savills as well.
Thank you, Chanelle. And Emma, do you think we're doing enough to attract a diverse cohort in the property profession at grassroots level? And what are you guys doing?
We're all doing a lot. I think there's no doubt about that. The challenge is it making any difference? And I suppose a bit frustrated about the pace of, despite everybody's best efforts, you know, the pace of change. You know, we are a founding partner, like many on the call, of something called Pathways to Property, which has been going now for 10 years. Its modus operandi is to take 16-year-old children, young adults, and take them off for a week-long residential course, immerse them in the world of real estate and open their eyes to the plethora of careers that there are, in the hope that they then select real estate as an apprenticeship or a university preference for a degree. Great organisation doing really good things, but the volume of people that then end up picking real estate and then ending up in the industry is is modest. And I'm always struck when you go along to the summer school, which they hold, which if you haven't been, is the most incredible experience in terms of seeing how young people get immersed and advocate for it, is that these kids have huge choices. The lawyers, the insurance companies, the accountants, they are all putting substantial investment, time and energy, and they've got bigger buying power, frankly, than the real estate sector. And so these kids are awash with choices. And I do wonder whether or not, real estate's a very small circle, isn't it? And whether or not we should be joining forces with other industries who have the same challenges about wanting to increase the representation of broader sectors of the community within their organisations, and hang on to their coattails a bit, because I think all the while we focus on increasing representation in our sector, it's quite small. It's quite difficult to get that cut through, as Chanelle said, convincing that mum or dad that they should be choosing real estate over accountancy or law or whatever it might be. Our voice is small, so I would like to see us moving a bit out of our sector and working with other industries who we work with anyway. Real estate, lawyers, accountants, the public sector. There's a bit of a call to arms, I think.
Civil engineers, maybe, Janet.
Business in general, right? We all share similar challenges. So we are doing some stuff. I'm just a bit frustrated, I suppose, about the pace of change, and I wonder if we should think about it in a slightly broader way.
Thank you. And I think it's when we go to careers events, the kids are, and if Rav Chima from Located is on the call, he's reported this to me on several occasions. They have a table, and there's a table the kids go and talk to the lawyers. It's a table where the kids go and talk to the surveyor, and all they're interested in is how much money they're going to earn. And they think the lawyers are loaded, don't they? So they're there's this sort of, and we need, those are the sorts of the education piece around telling people all the kinds of things you can do in our sector. And I guess the wider sector, the built environment sector, that is something that is extremely valuable. But we are small, and it is a bit bitty, and the RICS is doing a bit here, and we as a small organisation, all our organisations are doing something, but actually bringing all those, it shouldn't be difficult, this, but it's actually just bringing it all together. I think that's a really good point.
And just, if I could, just one example of where it has worked recently. So last year there was a programme called 10,000 Black Interns, which I'm sure a number of people on the call might have been familiar with. We participated, but it was much more than about real estate. It went across all sectors. It got huge profile. It resulted in a really strong uptake. So I think when there is that cross-business effort around a particular push on an initiative, it can work, and that was a good one for me.
Thank you, Emma. Harry, I'm just going to come back to you. What are you doing in your organisation in terms of focus on the opportunity around recruitment and retention?
Yeah, and I think the conversation we've just had is a really interesting one, and it kind of goes to show how if you can work with people really early in their career and while they're still in school, you can really raise some kind of aspiration and excitement. I think one of the things that I'm really mindful of is that what we do in real estate can have really positive impacts and outcomes. So many of us have got real purpose and kind of mission driven organizations, and I think that's something that we can really harness. One of the initiatives that we've supported in recent years has been Generation Brainery, which has brought together organizations from the public and private sector to work with young people still in education or leaving education, to actually take them out and show them what a career in property and real estate can be like, to meet people who are working in the sector, to see construction and regeneration happening. And so I think being able to work to inspire young people from a diverse range of backgrounds is a really important kind of grassroots way that we can support that. One of the other things that we've done across the industry is work with an organization called Public Practice, who actually are about how do we bring the skills and expertise from the private sector to actually create capacity in the public sector, especially around some of those areas where there's a real shortage of of skills and capacity, like the planning system. And that's been a really great opportunity to bring people with one set of skills, really good experience in the private sector, into a secondment opportunity in the public sector. I've been mentoring one of the participants who's got an architecture background but is now working at Meridian Water in North London, and has been able to kind of develop their career and their network in the process of doing that, which is really important. I think that from an organization's perspective, through recruitment, I think, and retention, the other important part is making sure there's flexibility in the way that we work, in providing people to work flexibly and therefore be able to build their career while making sure that the rest of their commitments in life are possible. That's something that's been really important to our carers network. So just understanding people's wider commitments in work has been a really important part of what we've been doing.
Thank you, Harry. Janet, did you have any brief further insight into that, or would you, given from your previous role, I'm thinking?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I think in terms of so recruitment and retention, absolutely. I mean, in the public sector, and frankly across the whole sector, there's a real sense of mission and purpose. That's one of the real attractions, I think, for younger people. I think the sustainability agenda is huge, and that's a real draw that will draw in people from all walks of life. I think, given that the topic is also about the differences between the public and the private sector, I will just sort of one sort of call out really that that we do have in the public sector, which in government property, which is that just the sheer scale and diversity of what we do, and the kinds of work and projects you can work on. So, if I just take my own examples, I've worked on, the Foreign Office overseas estate. I've worked on the Ministry of Justice, prisons and courts. And when I first joined government property, I was working in the Department for Education, looking after their commercial property, which is now grouped into one agency called the Government Property Agency. So the sheer scale and diversity, I think, is a real attraction. I think the other thing that I just sort of call out as well is the effects that digitisation is going to have for our industry, and the real potential that that's going to have to draw upon groups of people that historically might have been put with. Somebody mentioned earlier in the call the perception problem of property, and I'm certainly seeing this on, in the engineering side, but actually digitisation opens up all sorts of opportunities to reconfigure how we do work. So again, I think that's an opportunity for us to think, well, how are we going to frame this and use that to our advantage across the whole industry? So I think there's lots of opportunity going forward. Thanks, Lara.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. And Chanelle, I said I'll come back to you on Savills networks, and you obviously you've already mentioned the number of networks. How do you enable those networks to have a say on how you progress D&I and Savills, and what do those networks bring to the party?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do it a little bit differently actually at Savills. So we have working groups, which are the 6 that I mentioned before, and they are very strategically focused. So it's about initiatives that drive forward progression on those particular pillars. And then underneath those working groups, we then have staff networks, or ERGs, as some people know them as. And the reason that we have that split is because the strategic working groups are quite business focused. So it's about improving things within the business and across the sector, and working with various different people and other property organisations to benefit the business and the sector. But the staff networks are for our employees. So they are to build community. They are to enable employees to have a voice and a say, and to come together and meet one another, and to be able to build those connections. And I thought it was quite important to have that differentiation between the two. So people within the staff networks obviously feed into the working groups, and they feed into the work that's happening and the priorities of the group, looking at different talent programs, if that's one of the priorities of the group, versus putting on educational celebrations or events and those sorts of things. But we thought it was really important to enable colleagues and employees in the business to be able to just connect with one another, because it's such a powerful tool to be able to bring people together. Myself, I love meeting other mothers. I love especially single mothers, and being able to talk to them about their experiences in the workplace. So just bringing people together in that way and enabling them to have that route that way. Also, the reason we do it that way is because you can have as much say or not as much say as you want. So if you're part of one of the staff networks, you can turn up to, one event a year, you can turn up to no events a year, you can just receive a newsletter and that's your kind of input, or you can be really active and you can be, really kind of driving change and working with the working group to enable that level of change. So that's the way we do it. We kind of split it out to enable people to have their say via those two channels.
Thank you, Chanelle. And back to you, Emma. What other initiatives is your organisation having success with in terms of fostering diversity and inclusion? What do you do at British Land?
So, I mentioned earlier we've got 10, which for an organisation which has only got 600 odd people feels a lot. And I get quite a lot of challenge actually as the Exco sponsor internally as to, Emma, have we got too many? There's 10 of them. Are they all really needed? And I don't mind whether we've got 20, frankly, because as Chanelle said, they are really led by the staff, and it's their opportunity to forge relationships around a whole range of issues that are important to them. But to answer your question in terms of recent success, I'd say our most recent new network is Next Gen. And that one has just blown us away in terms of their energy and their ability to actually work right across the organisation, although they're a cohort of young people. So they have initiated reverse mentoring programs along with our Reach committee as a bit of a collab. They have done teach-ins, dragging people from all across the organisation, whether you're in property management or whether you're in finance, whether you're in development, wherever it might be, to do lunch and learn initiatives, just almost kind of freebie CPD sessions, if you like, for people, regardless of whether or not you're in that sector. They've really done a lot of myth busting in terms of meeting the senior leadership team, hosting opportunities to do fireside chats with our Exco, with our board. So, they've just been a really unafraid, sort of no hold barred group of people who have just have in a really short space of time actually pushed the organisation along a long way, and I think really helped us in terms of our positioning to attract and retain young people, which has been a real focus for us. At the other end of the spectrum, our Women's Committee has been rebranded. I started that organisation. It was the first staff network when I joined British Land in 2014. That one had got a bit tired, to be honest. It started as a Women's Committee. Very quickly, it was felt that its agenda was too broad. There were mothers, not mothers. There were people who were carers. There were people who wanted to talk about not having children, and so we split the Women's Committee. A new parents and carers group was set up, allowing the Women's Committee to narrow its focus, and it's had some recent success around menopause policies. So I suppose we think of our organisations and our networks being successful if they're allowed to evolve. They can increase in number as the issues come into the fore, and they're not static. I think what was an issue or an area of focus in 2014 clearly is quite different today, and rightly so. So success is kind of, for me, something about being open and receptive to allowing them to evolve as they need to, and we've seen some great results as a business.
Thank you, Emma. I'll come to you, Harry, in a second, but just to remind all of the people listening in case you missed this at the start, the Q&A is enabled. So if you want to write your questions into the Q&A box I will ask as many of those as I can in the last 10 minutes that we've got. So Harry, coming to you, have you got one or two successes in your organisation that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been really focused on, in addition to making sure we've got a really diverse cohort of people in the organisation, is that we've got a really inclusive culture. And one of the things that we've been doing in order to continue to make progress there is a programme of psychological safety training. So giving people the opportunity to get some formal training, both as the whole organisation, but also as line managers and our wider leadership, to be able to foster an environment where people can feel confident to share their views, where they're able to feel as though challenge is a constructive thing. And I think that's really important for making sure that there's a diverse range of views in the decisions we take, in how we prioritise things within the organisation. We've certainly got a real belief that if we have a more inclusive environment, because people feel safe to share, to learn and to challenge, and we give them some tools to be able to do that, we can achieve more through working together in that way. We can enhance employee engagement. We also think that it fosters an ability to be more creative, to share ideas, and therefore to innovate more quickly, and certainly hope that it allows a greater sense of well-being amongst people, and that they're able to take that to, whether it be the networks or other part of the organisation, but really feel as though their voice is heard. And it's been part of making sure people feel empowered to take part in the important work, because so many people are here driven by our kind of purpose and mission.
Thank you. And Janet, I'm going to come to you next. I'm interested in your view on successes in your previous role, but whether you've picked up anything particularly interesting or insightful in the month, or is it even been a month? It's not, is it? A couple of weeks? You and you follow the ICE.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge amount that government property profession has achieved, and I'm sure will continue to develop. I think the real challenge is going to be that progression piece, because we've done quite well in government property on building strong talent pipelines. We've now got to put our money where our mouth is. And just going back a bit to something Chanelle said, there's something about people need those role models. They need to be able to see that they can achieve at whatever level they want to achieve. I think I'm on, day 7 in the new job in civil engineers. I think they've also done pretty well, actually, in terms of those early talent pipelines. I mean, this is a professional institution, so we don't employ the engineers ourselves, but we help industry build those talent pipelines. I think particularly they've done a lot of work in schools, and I think a couple of colleagues on the call have mentioned that they're active in that area. And I think some of the figures I've seen so far, really strong representation in the early talent pipeline, particularly from ethnic minority backgrounds, sort of double the sort of ONS statistics for the population. So really good sort of work at that level. But again, I'm seeing that at the very top levels in the industry, just because change takes so long, doesn't it, that, we're just not seeing that the profile at those top levels is changing that fast. So I think, you said, Lara, at the beginning that, you don't have all the answers. And I don't think any of us do, but I think, we've been hearing lots of really great ideas, and the benefit of this session is sharing those ideas around how we can make it easier for people to stay in the industry and to progress their careers. So I do think having sort of positive programs like mentoring and sponsorship are so important. Really got to put our money where our mouth is and make sure people can progress. So some differences in the new job, Lara, and some things are really just the same across the whole built environment, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. And Chanelle?
Yes, just very quickly, I'll just pull out two. So we've started to record more in-depth data about our workforce, and I think that that is quite key in being able to track progress, but also to see where we currently are within our journey of representation across the workforce. So we now, for example, ask the 3 questions about socioeconomic background, which is something that we didn't do before. And I think it's key in being able to make sure that we're getting out to the right people, and that also we can see that whether us going out to schools is having a difference and people wanting to apply. The second thing that I will just very quickly say is that we have introduced allies training within Savills. So encouraging people to firstly learn about, you know, potential glass ceilings or issues that other people might have that they don't particularly face themselves, but also to be able to encourage an environment and a culture where people feel like they can either ask questions or to be able to call out behaviours if they find them offensive or unacceptable, and just to make sure it's not the same people that, you know, are responsible in any workplace. It's not just Savills, but in any workplace too, that they're the same ones that are saying, oh, you know, that's not the right terminology anymore, or that's not the right way to phrase that, or that might be slightly offensive. So those are 2 things of quite a few that we are particularly proud of introducing that we think are having success.
Thank you, Chanelle. And the final question before we go into the Q&A, and we haven't got much time left, so if I can ask you all to keep it brief, 30 seconds-ish each. So in the context, this is the killer question, in the context of D&I, where do you think your own organisations need to improve the most? And I'm going to go to Harry first.
Hi, thank you. Look, as somebody who personally lives with a lot of privilege, I think it's really important that we have leaders from across a diverse range of backgrounds really championing inclusion and diversity. So I think real collective leadership is really important, and greater representation at senior leadership levels. I think we've talked about that. It's something we'll continue to strive for.
Thank you, Harry. Emma?
I think we can do better in every area. I don't think we can claim credit for having reached where we want to get to. I suppose more specifically, what I would want to make sure we try and avoid is that things become a competition. I think personally, I was very focused, still am, on gender equality and advancing the progression of female and women through the real estate sector, but that needn't be at the expense of social mobility aspirations, ethnic diversity aspirations. And I'm not worried, but I'm keen that we all avoid getting into a situation where one needs to rise for the other one to fall.
Thank you, Emma. Janet?
Yeah, it's echo Emma's comments about let's not make it a competition. But I think, you know, you've heard me say a couple of times already, I think keeping people in our industry and helping them progress to the level they want, I think is the priority. For me, it was a priority in my old job. It's definitely a priority in the new job. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, Chanelle.
Yeah, so I think that the property industry gets a bit of a hard time around the lack of D&I, and I think that it's or representation, should I say. And I think that it can become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So for me, I think we should do better at celebrating our successes wider and out of our own sector, more to try and encourage people from out of the sector and people that might want to change careers midway to come into property and to see the things that we are actually doing quite well.
Thank you. And Chanelle, I'm going to stay with you because there's quite an interesting question in the Q&A, which is specifically for you, which is whether there is any way that Savills can reward inclusive behaviours. And I think the point that's made, to Jennifer, thank you for your question. The point that's made here is that often, you know, and I recognise this in organisations that I've worked with previously, you tend to get very good sponsorship at the top, and there's a lot going on with the networks, and you know, the middle section is kind of a bit of a problem. So is there anything that Savills does to reward inclusive behaviours that you could tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of each financial year, divisions are asked to talk about the things that they have done to contribute towards diversity and inclusion, and that what they say impacts upon, I guess, remuneration and things like that. So we definitely do reward for it. And also in appraisals, there is a section under people where you're encouraged to talk about the things that you do around D&I, and also at promotion time, there is a specific question during promotion panels about your contribution towards D&I. So we very much have incorporated it into progression and sort of remuneration as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And Harry, I'm going to ask you this question because you specifically mentioned this, and I've said myself that socioeconomic background is a really interesting one from my point of view. Yes, I am a woman, but the big thing for me is my background. So I'm really interested in seeing kids from the kind of background that I came from, also understanding that property in the built environment's a job for them. And Janet, you know, I think it's really important that we all tell our stories really openly and honestly, so that other people in our industry that are coming into our industry know what's possible, regardless of whatever your background might be. So Harry, in terms of the socioeconomic point, do you think this a hell of a question, do you think social class, socioeconomic background should be a protected class? I don't suppose that you know whether it's likely to become one, because you know that you're not in a role where that is something that you're presumably deciding, but what's your view on that, given you specifically mentioned socioeconomic background earlier?
Yeah, and look, I won't be able to speak on the specifics of protected characteristics in that regard, but what I would say is it's incredibly important that there is opportunity for people from all socioeconomic backgrounds, especially those who have and had the same life chances. So it's important, you know, whether it be in our delivery activity and the way that we work with partners to provide housing from a societal perspective, or what we do in bringing people through into our organisation, that the socioeconomic background and giving people opportunities is a really important part of what we do. I work with the Early Careers Network pretty heavily, and you can see some really diverse backgrounds of the people who are joining on our graduate network, but clearly that's people who've been through university. So we're spending time thinking about apprenticeships and other routes to allow people to have opportunities. But it's a big priority, regardless of whether it's a protected characteristic, I think, for us.
Well, the intersectionality issue, which people have mentioned, is a real challenge, isn't it? It's a real challenge. Now, Emma, I'm going to come on to you if you don't mind. So this is about targets. So we discussed this earlier, but also this has come up. Melanie has asked a question in the chat function, which is about whether we should have very specific targets, and do you have targets in your organisation? She wasn't particularly asking British Land, but I'm asking you because you and I had a conversation about it earlier. So do you think we should have targets? What should those targets look like? Is that something that would help the diversity of our profession?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if you look at countries around the world where they have set quite specific targets about representation in the workforce, you either get there or you don't. It's quite binary. And I think it does accelerate the pace at which people make sure they do reach them for the reasons of you know, if you fail, it's not a great place to be in terms of running that organization. As a business, we set some specific targets around gender and also around ethnic diversity. And I think someone else on the call earlier, I think Chanelle mentioned, you need some good data, because you need to know what you're shooting for and what your ability is to achieve those targets before you set them. But once you set them, I think everybody focuses heavily and hard on making sure you meet them, and it drives quite a lot of behaviour that I'm sure would happen anyway. But I think back to that point we were discussing at the start of the call about the disappointment about the pace of change in our industry. I feel that targets will help you probably get there quicker than not. Now they've got to be achievable, they've got to be measurable, and you know, you need a whole business support behind it. But I suspect that we will start to see more targets as we all shoot for being bigger and better. And 25 by 25 is obviously a fairly well trailed one now, which is looking to see female representation at CEO level by 2025. It's not that far away, and it will drive behaviours, and whether or not we can do that across other aspects of D&I, I think we should. And I think we will start to see more businesses take that up.
Thank you, Emma. Participants, I'm trying to get through as many of these questions as I can, but please keep them in the Q&A rather than in the chat, because I can't look at both at the same time, and Chair. So, G. Mooney, what is the panel doing to attract and retain over 50s individuals into the workforce, given this is one of the most economically inactive groups currently? Who am I going to go for? Janet, I'm going to come to you for that.
Great question. And as somebody in that category, I can sort of wholly understand where it's coming from. I'll have to sort of give a fairly general answer because I don't know exactly what is going on in the engineering side of things, but other to say that engineering, this is just literally an impression, seems to do better at retaining people sort of well beyond their 50s. But that could be a sort of, not particularly grounded. It could be just anecdotal. I think there's huge opportunities, aren't there? Because, we learned all sorts through the pandemic, but I think many of us sort of reassessed our values and our life choices and, work-life balance. And, part-time working and partial retirement, I think is something that I've seen a bit of in government property, but I think there's huge potential for us to use that proactively. I do recall that some years ago, actually, Network Rail set up a returners programme to recruit women who'd taken a career break to have children, to get them back into the workplace. And I think that was quite successful. So I just think, we just need to think more broadly. Jobs in property don't have to be 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Can we repackage the work so it can be done more flexibly? Can it be done part-time? Can it be job shared? Can we sort of be proactive about people who want to take partial retirement? So a bit of a general answer, I think, but I do think it's a really interesting question, and it's a really untapped area, I think, of some of the things that we've been doing.
Thank you, Janet. And Emma, I'm going to come to you. It's a sort of vaguely linked question, but it's anonymous, but it's not a particularly, it's not a challenging question, so don't take anything from that. There's a lot of issues around minority groups leaving the industries, whatever those industries might be, once they've completed their training, as they feel they don't belong. Is there anything that you think that businesses could do to change that culture so that these cohorts feel like they could stay? And I mean, I recognise this from the government property profession, which covers all of the built environments, big profession. A lot of people, the kind of progression into senior civil service is really, really poor. So is there anything you want to briefly say on that before I hand over to Sue to wrap up?
There's two things instinctively spring to mind. Firstly, you need some role models at senior leadership level that give a very obvious career path and progression opportunity that's tangible and feels familiar. So that's nice if it's there, and I know there's a lot to do in terms of achieving that, but it would help. The other thing, and we've just kicked off a pilot on it, so I can't comment on its outcome, but I think it's got interesting prospects, which is a reverse mentoring program with our senior exco and our junior members of staff from ethnic minority backgrounds, just to walk in each other's shoes. And I think that will provide us some really good data on which to work out whether or not we need to do things differently in terms of supporting those individuals to stay with the business and progress their careers.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So thank you to Chanelle, Janet, Emma and Harry. I'm going to give you a little round of applause. I don't think anybody else can on the call, and hand over to you, Sue, to wrap up.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Lara, and thanks Chanelle and Janet and Emma and Harry as well for actually, a really, really interesting presentation, and actually taking what was actually some really lively questions. I mean, just to say, to repeat really what Richard said at the beginning of this, it was a real shame that we had to do this online, because clearly you know, whatever anyone says, you don't get the interaction that you get when we're all in person. Savills have very, very kindly suggested that actually Savills host an event later on this year in person. And I think by the amount of interest we've had today and the number of questions and things, we should really think about doing that and perhaps coming together again towards the end of the year, perhaps dealing with some of the questions which we've not dealt with today, and actually how we format that, you know, we can discuss. But I'd really like that to happen if that's possible. Thanks to Savills in the meantime for sort of hosting on the technology and all the rest of it, because REB find that very, very difficult to do. And the other thing, as this says, we welcome your feedback. And yeah, if you can let us know on that, I mean, your feedback to the session generally, but also if we are going to do something later on this year, this is a sort of a logistical point, but if we are going to do something in person later this year, whether people would like that to take place in the morning, in the early morning, or in the evening. That's another issue which we face constantly in relation to gender in particular, is when we're running events, do women in particular, because they tend to be the carers, want to do events in the early morning or in the evening. So if you could come back to us on that one as well, that'd be really helpful. But thanks everybody for participating. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to Savills for hosting this. And hopefully we will see a number of you in person later on this year. Thanks very much indeed. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.